Ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon to you all. As we prepare for the start of the Livability Challenge, we're going to show you a QR code now, and we have a little exercise for you. For those of us online as well, please do scan the QR code, and we have a question that we hope all of you can participate in. And that question is, what is your word for 2022? What is your word for 2022? All right, the responses are coming in now. Inflection, wow, that's deep. Joy, peace, possibilities. Introspection, that is a good one. Re-energized. Look up, I like that. Okay, excellent. I hope that's warmed you up for this afternoon and for the event that we're going to be having here today, in person and virtually. I would like to officially welcome all of you to the launch of the Livability Challenge 2022. My name is Jessica Chiam. I'm founder and managing director of EcoBusiness, and I'm delighted to be your host today. This is the first event of the year that we're hosting, and perhaps also the first event that you're attending in person or virtually. And as we turn the page on 2021 and enter into a new year, I wanted to take this opportunity to share some thoughts. This year past has been another challenging one due to the prolonged COVID-19 pandemic. Many of you will also be aware of the severe climate-related events that impacted Asia in the last few weeks of the year, from the once-in-a-century floods in Malaysia to the deadly Typhoon Rai, which swept through the Philippines. And despite the difficult economic environment, we've had some highlights in 2021. Around the world, climate and sustainability commitments have been strengthened, both in the public and private sectors. And following the recently held COP26 Climate Summit in Glasgow, UK in December, some 90% of global GDP is now covered by net zero pledges. While the business and political will to tackle sustainability and the climate crisis is growing, I guess the bigger question is, how will we get there? This is where the Livability Challenge plays a key role. We search the world for disruptive, science-based solutions, and we help the founders and entrepreneurs behind these ideas accelerate that process from lab to market. One of the unfortunate trends that have happened in recent years, however, is that science is under siege. And I saw the word look up just now, so I'm guessing, how many of you have seen Don't Look Up on Netflix? Quite a fair few. Well, those of you who haven't watched it should watch it. And those of you who have seen it will know that it touches on this growing denial of scientific evidence. Conspiracy theories on everything from climate change to COVID-19 vaccines are on the rise, leading to an absence of trust in everything from business to governments to science. It is in this context that it's ever more important that we respond swiftly and collectively to solve our problems, and with solutions that are grounded by strong science. TLC is a manifestation of that collective action, and in the last edition, we saw over 450 applications from 60 countries, and we were also supported by a broad alliance of 77 partners. From RWDC, which created a PHA material to replace single-use plastics in the first year, to Turtle Tree Labs, who have pioneered lab-grown milk. Many of TLC's winners and finalists have gone on to raise millions more in funding and to commercialize the solutions. And so we continue on that journey, and we hope we can help to support many more founders and their dreams. The Thomasic Foundation this year has doubled the target on us, so we seek your cooperation to help spread the word for the Livability Challenge in 2022 so we get even more ideas from across the globe. Jokes aside, we're very grateful for the long-running partnership with Thomasic Foundation, without whom this entire initiative would not have been possible. We would also like to thank our old and new partners. Many of you are here with us in this room today and also online. We're very excited to be launching 2022's edition with all of you. You can see the logos on the screen here are a collection of our partners, and we are still getting more on board. Very shortly, we will hear more about the new themes of 2022 from Mr. Lim Hock Chuan, Chief Executive of Thomasic Foundation Livability. But for now, we have prepared a short documentary for you. It's a look back at our TLC journey in the past year, and it will also give you a flavor of what TLC is all about. So sit back and enjoy.
We want everybody to get very excited for this challenge. 2021 is going to be a huge year for everyone out there. We are super pumped up.
There is an urgent need to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. We need to capture CO2 instead of emitting it to create a circular economy.
In the last 13 years, I've accumulated many smartphones starting with my iPhone 3. All these smartphones are powered by a lithium-ion battery.
A very warm welcome to all of you, and welcome to the grand finale of the Livability Challenge 2021. Over the years, TLC has grown from strength to strength to become Asia's leading sustainability solutions platform, whose single purpose is to support startups from all over the world make their sustainability ideas a reality. To start us off today, it is my pleasure to introduce our first team, Econic from the United Kingdom. Dr. Michael Kember, over to you.
Our Livability project overcomes barriers to commercial adoption in a conservative and heavily regulated supply chain.
Can you tell me a little bit more about the licensing structure?
$3.6 trillion is the cost of energy we use in chemical separation processes every year. It's equivalent to 15% of the world's energy consumption.
You mentioned AI. I mean, that's quite interesting. Yeah. How does that help with membrane design?
We're proposing a solution to tackle one of our greatest threats, climate change. Climate change is the single greatest threat to a sustainable future.
Very exciting, a big, bold project which promises potentially a huge impact.
What's novel is the process and formulation of chemicals, which is hard to replicate, and that's our secret sauce.
How do you compare with existing petroleum-based coating?
What we bring to the table, what is new about this technology, is the excellent performance in separating hydrogen from CO2, which is one of the hardest gas to separate out there.
Can you explain to me exactly how this technology would make cities more sustainable and livable?
How much adaptation needs to take place in the process for you to go to other types of batteries as well as these types of products?
Actually, the interesting thing about solar panels and even things like your energy storage, your UPS, they all require lithium batteries.
I think I'm a little bit torn because I think from an impact perspective, we have the results out.
Let's have the drum roll, please. The Livability Challenge grand winner for 2021 goes to Sea Change. Congratulations, Sea Change. Thomasic Foundation has decided to award you the $1 million in funding, and it would seem that your distance has not really deterred you guys, so huge congratulations.
We hope to continue to be able to attract game-changing deep technology solutions to the climate change problem and sustainability problem.
Well, thanks very much, Jessica. Of course, it's great to win, but first of all, congratulations to all of the other finalists as well. Our thanks to the Thomasic Foundation, thanks to the judges for selecting us.
I'm completely surprised, and it's been a great experience. Congratulations to all the finalists, and thank you again for choosing Sea Change.
So TLC has been very impactful for our company because this gives us the platform and the ecosystems to meet different people and like-minded people, and this opportunity is very hard to find.
So my advice to future participants is to really enjoy the process and learn as much as you can, because you'll be surrounded by a lot of talented people, basically a nurturing community who wants to help you.
I think that TLC is such an important platform, and the growth is really important because we are searching the world for the best ideas, and we really need the best ideas to be solving our climate crisis. I hope all of you enjoyed that video. I just realized it looks as if I'm wearing the exact same thing in the finale and here. I promise you I'm wearing a different dress, but it's okay, it's my TLC uniform. I'd like to invite the people standing there. We actually have a lot more space on this side. If you would like to take a seat on there, yeah, so we can accommodate. We have a lot of space. Thank you. Brings back lots of wonderful memories of the last year, and the one thing that I wanted to say as well, it reminded me that last year we had to launch TLC actually completely virtual because, you know, the pandemic was still raging on, and it's so delightful to be able to be in person here, seeing some faces, and also be able to welcome our virtual audience from online, so I'm really happy about that. Now, without further ado, to kick off this afternoon's event, I'd like to invite Mr. Lim Hock Chuan, Chief Executive of Thomasic Foundation Livability, to give the opening remarks. Please join me to welcome him.
Hi, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. A very warm welcome to this afternoon's event. My name is Lim Hock Chuan. I'm the CEO of Thomasic Foundation Livability. First of all, I want to acknowledge the presence of our distinguished partners and guests, both here in person and as well as those online. Welcome to this afternoon's event. Thomasic Foundation believes that innovation is the key to creating impactful improvements to livability of cities. So while the pandemic is still on, we believe that our search for innovative solutions to improve livability and sustainability must continue. We have a carbon problem. The current rate of carbon emission will result in global warming of about 1.5 degrees by the year 2030, and for cities around the equator, it could go up to as high as 3 degrees. The energy consumption itself contributes about 3/4 of the total carbon emission. The food industry alone contributes about 1/4 of the carbon emission, and a lot of food is wasted. So we need to find solutions, both high-tech solutions as well as nature-based solutions. Nature-based solutions can include conserving and restoring forests, mangrove, peatland, coastal ecosystems, so that these ecosystems, this natural ecosystem, can capture carbon and store them. The Nature Conservancy estimates that up to 1/3 of the reduction in carbon that's needed to cap global warming to under 2 degrees can come from nature-based solutions. So in addition to solutions that will resolve and address carbon capture, utilization, and sequestration, we also need to look for innovative solutions in the area of food, healthy food. We must look for solutions that will produce large quantity of healthy food with small footprint. And at the same time, we should also consider promoting what I call a circular economy for food. And this is where the Thomasic Livability Challenge comes in. Once again, we are conducting a global search for innovative solutions that will help address the various adverse impacts caused by climate change and to improve livability of cities and sustainability of cities. So this year's Livability Challenge, there are 3 themes, and these are: 1, decarbonisation. So we are looking for large-scale solutions to capture, utilize, and store carbon. 2nd, food and agri-technology. We are basically looking for novel plant-based protein or alternative food that can be produced in large quantity to meet the increased demand for food and yet has a small carbon footprint. Thirdly, nature-based solutions. So we are looking for solutions that can conserve, restore tropical forests, mangrove, peatland, and coastal ecosystem within Southeast Asia. So on this note, I'm excited to announce that the Livability Challenge 2022 is now open to receive applications. So if you have great innovation out there, please apply to us by 1st April. And I hope that your submission, your innovation, will win the $1 million prize that will help you and take your innovation a step closer to commercialization. All innovations are welcome, and may the best innovation win. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lim, for those insights and for officially kicking off TLC 2022. I'd now like to hand it over to our Director of Partnerships, Megan C., who will be moderating an exciting discussion that we've planned for today on breakthrough innovations. Megan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jessica, and good morning, afternoon, or evening to all of you attending from wherever you are in the world. My name is Megan C., Director of Partnerships of EcoBusiness, Asia Pacific's leading media and business intelligence organization dedicated to sustainable development and responsible business. I'm delighted to be your moderator for today. I'm going to invite my plenary discussion panelists up as well. I have Malavika Bambuwali from NG Impact, and also Paul Santos as well from Wavemaker Partners. Yes, you may take off your mask as well. I also have Phil Inagaki as well joining me from wherever he is in the world right now. I think it's about 12 a.m. over there, so thank you, Phil, for joining us. Before we go on, please allow me a few moments to set out the context of our discussion today. Following the highly anticipated talks of the COP26, some 90% of global GDP is now covered by net zero commitments. While progress has been made across a wide range of industries, many sectors will still require breakthrough innovation to leapfrog existing infrastructure and also legacy issues as well. With a relative ease of access to information, capital, and the emergence of new business models, some say that the time is now ripe for breakthrough innovations to help us get to net zero. But how will we get there? It is amid this backdrop that we have invited some leading thinkers in this space to provide insights on the technological, corporate strategy, and also investment trends in the years ahead. Just as I introduced to you the speakers today, I also like to invite our attendees to answer this question via Slido that we have prepared for you, which we'll be taking into the opening plenary as well. So for those in person, feel free to snap out your phone right now and take a picture of the Slido on the screens, and for our virtual attendees as well. The question here is, what breakthrough innovations are you hoping to see in 2022? Just as we start to see answers on the screen, it is now my great pleasure again to introduce our speakers properly this time. Paul Santos, Managing Partner of Wavemaker Partners, Malavika Bambuwali, Managing Director, Sustainably Solutions of NG Impact, and also Phil Inagaki, Managing Director of Zora Innovation. Thank you, Paul, Malavika, and Phil, for taking the time to join us today. To our in-person and also online audience, please do stay engaged in our conversation using a virtual chat function and the Slido feature to ask our panelists questions. So while we see the answers coming in, actually, I guess they're not there anymore. The first question I'd like to pose to all our panelists to help us set the scene really is, how do you define breakthrough innovations and which sectors do you see them coming from? Paul, I'd like you to start first, and then Malvika, and then Phil can go.
Yeah, again, thanks for having me. Good afternoon, everyone. So there are many ways to, I guess, to define it, right? I'd like to take maybe the practical approach, right? There's this saying, it's not always the best technology that wins. It's the one that gets most widely adopted. And very often we can fall in love with the technology for technology's sake. But maybe I'd like to think of the breakthrough ones as the ones that are really breaking through and scaling. Because it's only through that you will be able to, I guess, deliver the impact. You can have a nice scientific, discovery, and you can say it's breakthrough scientifically, but if it stays in the lab, then the impact is felt less. So maybe the way I'd like to think about breakthrough innovations are innovations that have actually scaled. Now, we'll see a lot of projects with potential to get there, but the ones who've broken through, for me, are the ones who've already scaling.
Thank you for that, Paul. And now about Malvika.
Thanks, Paul. I think that's a really interesting point of view. And I was thinking of this question about what is a breakthrough innovation, and I think my point of view is like what it is and what it isn't, right? So what it is it's something that's solving a universal challenge, right? So something that's well understood challenge, and it's finding a solution for that. And maybe like, let's say very simply, like solar technology is a solution for climate change, so it's a breakthrough innovation. But what it isn't, and there maybe I agree with you, but the question really is the timeline. So it's tempting to say that the technology should be simple, or the solution rather should be something that's easily adopted, widely adopted, doesn't require massive behavioral change, doesn't require massive systemic change, because then it becomes too complicated. So it should be simple to adopt. But I also want to say that's not true, because sometimes the best solutions do require that systemic change, they do require that behavioral change, and over time, and that's where the tricky part is, what time frame are we looking at? It may become breakthrough. So in the first 2 years, maybe 1 year, it's not happening. 5 years, it's not. I mean, solar took 30 years, right, to become mainstream, and then suddenly, it offered a platform. The technology offered a platform for everything from, solar home systems to solar bricks to solar, et cetera, combined with storage. And then it really was a breakthrough. So how long is that time period? I guess is the question for breakthrough innovation, really.
Yes, no, that's really good insights. Thank you, Malvika. And Phil, we'd like to comment on both Paul's and Malvika's responses, and also at yours.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and those were interesting responses. I think, from the perspective of an early stage venture investor in climate, a lot of times when we're looking at breakthrough innovation, it has to do with cost, because the interesting thing is a lot of the technologies or solutions we're pursuing are proven to be possible, but the problem is they're not yet economical. The challenge with that is that it is very hard to do high quality techno-economic analysis when a technology is at an early level of development. So we're often looking for technologies where we can believe in that technology entitlement and that cost pathway, but to assess whether it really is a breakthrough at an early stage, it is hard sometimes.
Thank you for that, Phil. I'm going to stay with you on that. I know that you said it's hard, I guess, to make it innovation go to the breakthrough innovation stage. So I understand that you've held various roles, in various venture-backed startups as well, including your role now in Zora Innovation. So in your experience, how have you seen deep tech unlocking breakthrough innovations then?
How have we seen breakthrough innovation unlocking deep tech? Well, I would say maybe I'm going around the question a little bit, but the interesting thing right now is a few years ago I would have said that funding is a major issue for deep tech, but right now there's more and more capital. And what we're seeing is that some breakthrough innovations are reaching higher levels of commercializations fairly quickly, but some of the key ingredients is not only having a very good starting invention and but also really good investors, really good management around these technologies. And I'd say right now the constraint is less on the capital and more on the entrepreneurs. In fact, unlike, say, in software, where you can find a lot of entrepreneurs who have had multiple successful startups, it's not really that easy to find a serial climate entrepreneur who's had really multiple successes. And so we're trying to bring all the ingredients together to unlock these technologies, because the worst is when you see a technology which really has that huge potential, but does not have all the other ingredients and goes to waste. So I don't know if that exactly answered your question, but hopefully it was on topic.
No, it was good. Thank you so much, Phil. And on that point, I guess, we are finding the missing ingredient in various fields and ecosystem, and how we can advance that forward. So Paul, as managing partner of Wavemaker Partners and also a member of, the investment committee of the Asian Development Bank Ventures, how does, venture capital spur the growth of breakthrough innovations and provide that missing ingredient, hopefully, in that?
Yeah. So venture capital is risk capital, right? And so our role in a portfolio is to hopefully take the high risk, but then deliver the high reward, right? And so there are different ways you can fund the business. You can get your friends, family, and fools or angels. You can go to a bank. And the reason you will go to venture capital is because it's probably a riskier proposition than normal. And so as an early stage investor also, it's very clear that the downside is very clear, right? Like when we write a check into an early stage company, you know that there's a high chance it's going to go to zero. But why do we do it anyway? And so this is where the breakthrough side has to happen. For us to be able to generate a return for our investors, the reward has to be so good that when something is right, the returns make up for the risk that we took. And so because of that, I guess, design, we are looking for projects to fund that have the potential to break through, right? And we have to imagine it. And so that's sort of the role we feel we will play in the ecosystem, because you will still need money to get these projects off the ground, and that's kind of what our money is designed to do, and that's kind of our role within the portfolio of our investors, is to work with the founders to take that risk that will hopefully unlock the breakthroughs that they're imagining.
Right. Thank you for that, Paul. And Malvika, I'm not sure if you wanted to comment on that, but also from, I guess, the corporate perspective as well as the business perspective, what role do breakthrough innovations play in the course of your engagement with clients, and also in, energy impacts course to net zero as well?
So, I work a lot with sort of traditional brick and mortar clients, and I work, a lot in the energy sector as well, which is providing very traditional business, kilowatt hours. And breakthrough innovation is, I guess, different for this sector than it is for maybe the tech sector or maybe the consumer sector, where I think the innovations are happening at a much more rapid scale. So I would say, I think some thoughts I had were that, information, actually, the combination of tech and this brick and mortar sector is providing a very interesting scope for breakthrough innovation. Because when you combine information technology with something like energy, there's a lot of information available. You use IoT sensors, for example, to provide information on how people are consuming energy, how you can improve it, and that is causing a whole host of innovations. The second thing is business models, right? So the traditional way of providing energy was simply, you have a utility and you have a customer, but there's a lot of innovation taking place on the business model side of things as regulation, changes, and energy companies are starting to think of like concession agreements and starting to think of performance contracts where they'll help you save energy and take their fee out of that, And that sounds simple and it sounds like it's happening, but it's probably not happening enough because of regulation, and it's changing rapidly. But the change in the business model combined with the change in information available is making this sector really, really innovative and allowing you to embrace new types of, or new types of businesses to emerge in this sector.
No, absolutely agree. I think in terms of breakthrough innovations, obviously, we need to see, small incremental kind of innovative solutions come together, especially in the policy front, the business model front, your financing front as well. So I'm going to you now, Phil, in terms of, unlocking, the finance that's needed, for technologies such as nature-based solutions, food and agritech decarbonisation as well. How do you see this happening as we start to help nations, help companies as well achieve net zero targets?
In terms of what's necessary to unlock more resources?
Yes.
Well, we could talk a lot about this, but one of the things that's necessary is a full capital stack. And what's really interesting is you're seeing that emerge in climate. So you're seeing more early stage climate investors, more money going there. You're seeing a lot more money in late stage investments, which can be, rounds into hundreds of millions of dollars. My old fund, I worked for the Engine, one of their portfolio companies where they started, investing just a few $100,000 a few years ago. Commonwealth Fusion has raised 1.8 billion in one round a couple months ago. So you can see how big the financings are getting. And so it's great to see that capital, but there's also another type of capital needed, which is you're often needing first-of-a-kind project financing. In the solar industry, it took a long time for the industry to be mature enough where there was a lot of project financing available, and it wasn't perceived to be very high risk because people understood the industry. And you're seeing certain organizations like Breakthrough Catalyst, sister organization of Breakthrough Energy Ventures, which has now announced that they're going to deploy billions of dollars to do first-of-a-kind financing and in certain key sectors like green hydrogen, sustainable aviation fuels, etc. So I think continuing to mature that capital stack and all that's going on more broadly as well in ESG investing is very important and is on the right track, but we need more of it.
Thank you for that, Phil. And I'm going to let Paul as well comment on that, since you also have experience in that front.
Yeah, so maybe it's easier for me to explain this maybe within the context of a company, right? And we were talking about, let's say, food and agri, right? And we'll call it maybe a little, not so deep tech, maybe medium tech. And it's a company that got some news this week. It's a company called eFishery out of Indonesia. And the founder was a fish farmer engineer out of Bandung. And what he decided to do was, as a fish farmer himself, how could he increase the productivity of his fish farms? And if you think about a fish farm, not too many people will know that 80% of the cost is fish feed. And fish feed is given manually, right? And so he thought of a way to just automate it. So when the fish are hungry, you feed it. And that little act will help a farmer double their annual profit. So a pond will generate about $2,000 in profit a year. The machine will cost $200. And with that investment, they get to $4,000 in profit per year. And in a place like Indonesia, not too many people know, there are 30 million fish ponds. 7 million are commercial grade, right? And so from that, he created a whole digital fishing cooperative where he now is able to sell fish feed at 5% discount, which goes to your bottom line because that's 80% of the cost. You sell the machine, you give the farmers financing to buy the feed in the machine, and then later on, he's able to help them sell. And so in a couple of years, when we invested in 2019, he was doing about 2 million in revenue. Today is about 100 million. And he now impacts about 30,000 farmers, about 100,000 fish ponds, and we're just getting started. 100,000 fish ponds and we're already at 100 million. And I told you, there's 7 million commercial grade in Indonesia alone. And that's what attracted the investment, and you don't see this every day, of Thomasic, the SoftBank Vision Fund, and Sequoia, 90 million. If you talked to Gib 2 years ago, when he was talking to early stage investors, nobody would invest. Why? Because they don't invest in hardware. They don't invest in fish tech. Why are you profitable? Right? And so this is what I mean by sometimes if you're just solving a problem in a novel way, but in a way that actually makes sense for your customers, you will scale. It's breakthrough. And the other interesting thing about why the round was so small is the business is actually profitable. And so he's using this to expand regionally. And who would have thought that helping fish farmers increase their yield could build such a profitable business, at the same time, help farmers at the same time cut pollution by 30%. And so again, I give you a very specific and very simple example, but that's what I mean by you can see true impact. And you know, that's what's exciting for me. What's exciting for me is working with these entrepreneurs in a business that didn't seem so sexy at the time and seeing them break through and seeing the impact that they can have.
No, thank you for that, Paul. I think that is super inspirational as well. And obviously, you know, the hope here is that, you know, we'll see more business models like that emerge to be able to go to a point where it scales and then, you know, it makes sense for everyone as well. And on that point, well, not really, but going on to Malavika, on the decarbonization front, you know, we do need that in order to, you know, really help industries reduce their carbon emissions and also to get the rate to net zero as well. So I know that NG has announced, you know, its ambition to become net zero by 2045 and also committed to contribute about 45 megatesla to the decarbonization of clients by 2030. So very keen to know what is NG's action plan on these two fronts?
Yeah, so NG, I don't know how many people know about NG, but it's a, you know, it's a massive French conglomerate that generates energy, generates electricity as a business around the world. And NG has committed to net zero by 2045 target across scopes 1, 2, and 3. And this was announced in May 2021. And the way that NG is planning to get there is, you know, first of all, by decarbonizing its energy generation, right? So moving away from fossil fuels. And that means getting away, shutting down coal plants. I think that's one of the big things that's on the agenda. But also stepping down its gas commitments. But then scaling up on the renewable energy generation. So, you know, solar, wind, etc. So that's, I think, the primary way that we are kind of moving away from, you know, moving towards our net zero goals. But then there's a couple of other things to add on there. You know, one is we're also looking at our ways of working and the procurement, because NG is a massive procurer of goods and services. So looking at our suppliers and making sure that we are, over time, helping our suppliers become science-based, you know, sign up for science-based targets, for example, so that our scope 3 emissions, or when we procure products, those are as well heading to net zero. And then other things like, for example, I mean, by then we would, in a residual way, use carbon offsets. When we have, after we have accomplished these couple of things, we'll use carbon offsets to offset whatever's the remaining emissions.
And on that front, I guess, what is the biggest challenge that you're addressing in these two strategies?
I think, well, the biggest challenge is that these are not steps you can take overnight, and it takes a long time. And I mean, you know, how do you divest from some of these plants in an effective way is a very important question. Especially because, you know, is it divestment or is it sale? And if it's sale, then are you just passing the problem on to someone else? You know, those are some of the questions and those are some of the solutions that we really need to look at in an authentic way. And that's what we've been doing. And sometimes in the short run, it perhaps is more expensive to do the right thing. And that, I think that is, of course, one of the biggest challenges is how do you spend the money in the best possible way.
Right. And I'm not sure, so going back to you, Paul, I'm not sure if you have any advice on that or comments on that front in terms of spending money in the best possible way, because, you know, you did tell us a really good success story of the fish farm, but in your experience of you know, maybe failures, if you can even call them that, because they were taking a chance, what is an example on that front, and how do you think they would have managed to skip past that, you know, had they taken certain measures?
Yeah, so there are 1,001 reasons why a startup will fail at the seed stage, right? And perhaps what I can do is very quickly just name 3 things that we see the best companies do, and you can say that probably the companies that didn't do so well did the opposite. So one of the things that we see is over time, the best teams develop deeper, more nuanced understanding of their customers and consumers, and they use that as the basis for any decisions on strategy, business model, product, go-to-market, etc. And you can say conversely, there are a lot of founders who fall in love with their product and solution and think that customers are stupid. And that's kind of a danger sign, because then it's very difficult sometimes to grow a business like that. The second characteristic we saw was they consistently hit or achieve meaningful milestones that they set for themselves. And again, that's very easy to say, yeah, of course that makes sense. But at the seed stage, how many founders really take the milestones that they set for themselves seriously? Right? Some of them just put stuff on a piece of paper just to raise the money, but then when it's time to execute, they don't really care. They just want to raise more money, and therefore fundraising becomes the business model. And then the last bit is the best teams pay as much attention to building their organization as building their business. Sometimes startup founders can fall in love with the idea of being a startup founder and being cool, and they don't like doing the grown-up stuff. And typically, the startups that truly scale, there's an analogy they make. You move from being a jazz band to a marching band, right? If you want to scale, you got to grow up a certain way. And startups that don't take heed to that and just want to be the cool kids miss out. So those are the three things that we see from our best companies, and the also-rans, or the ones that don't quite make it, probably fail in one or more of these areas.
Right. Thank you for that, Paul. And then go on to you, Phil, if you'd like to comment on Paul as well, so provide some insight on what you see in common in terms of success stories, and also in maybe not so successful stories as well.
Well, one, again, I'll come from the perspective of really deep tech investing, where there's hardcore R&D in your years before you're really in commercialization. One of the common mistakes we see is startups at an early stage can have a very poor competitive intelligence. And we're working in a world where often these companies are spun out of leading universities with some of the smartest professors in the world and really bright scientists, but it's surprising often how much there's tunnel vision and how they're not aware of other similar technologies that are at a more advanced stage, or sometimes competing technologies solving the same problem coming from a different approach. And when you're embarking on something where you're not even really planning to hit the market for years, you can't really afford to be making decisions in the absence of that intelligence. And so we sometimes see companies which are veering off the right track because of just a lack of a broader perspective. I think companies that do well, they have identified a real problem, and they're not just pushing a technology trying to find an application for it. They've identified a massive problem which will be extremely valuable to solve, and then they chase it very aggressively, very quickly, of course, scaling teams, as Paul was saying, really well with first-year talent.
Thank you for that, Phil. And staying on to you, you have really good work in the deep tech sector. So knowing the three themes of this year, food and agri-tech, decarbonization, and also nature-based solutions, how can deep tech be then leveraged to accelerate any of these solutions?
Well, deep tech is especially relevant in decarbonization, right? There are currently some of the really deep tech approaches which are starting to gain a lot of attention are things like direct air capture, extremely challenging from reaching the right economics, but of course would be a beautiful solution to negative emissions. I think even looking at carbon capture, optimizing the cost of capturing flue gases, and then looking at different technologies that are targeting CO2 to value. For example, power to liquids to turn CO2 and hydrogen into sustainable aviation fuels. These are really hardcore deep tech innovations which will require a lot of investment, a lot of R&D, but actually can have huge impact. If really it could be developed, direct air capture is thought to be something which could really move the needle. If you could make it economical, sustainable aviation fuel can start decarbonizing a very hard to abate industry. Same thing for maritime, could be a solution. So those are some areas in deep tech we're looking at to help with decarbonization.
Thank you, Phil, for your insight. And going on to Malavika, on the decarbonization point, what do you think is most overlooked in companies' efforts to decarbonize?
Yeah, I think interestingly, companies, we did this survey and we found that executives and senior executives in companies think that they're, on their way to decarbonization and they're sort of, they've got a plan in place, and everything's hunky-dory. But when you start questioning sort of, one level down and saying, okay, have you got everything in place for decarbonization? Then you start to realize that actually, more than 50% of them said they actually don't have the data. The company is not actually capturing data on where the emissions are coming from, and then how do you actually know how you're going to decarbonize, right? And then, one level further down, do you have a financing structure in place? And, to your points, actually there is that capital available, but do you have a plan in place? Do you have a framework for how to tap on that capital, to tap on the new technologies? No. Again, majority said actually, no, they didn't. So I think what's happening right now is a little bit of a, there's probably a little bit of a delusion that like, we are all committed to net zero, but the next step of implementing on that net zero, how are you going to do it? Do you have the data? Do you have the financing? Have you got a plan which is concrete? That's where I think there's a big gap.
I see Paul over there smiling away, so I'm guessing you've got a comment or feedback on that as well.
No, it's a real challenge, right? And one of the things we're doing is we just launched a new unit called Wavemaker Impact, which is a venture builder. It's not a traditional VC fund where there are entrepreneurs that you back. We're actually looking for entrepreneurs to build companies with us. And one of the reasons we did it was we did a carbon map of Southeast Asia. And if you look at where the carbon emissions are, they're in land use and carbon sinks, they're in agriculture, they're in industrial processes, they're in the built environment, and they're in fleets, right? But fleets is 13%. Everything else is 87%. You know where 60 to 70% of VC investing is going? EVs, right? It's going into the fleets. Entrepreneurs aren't looking in the other areas. And why? It's because they're just not aware. Now, what we have is a team of people who are very experienced in this space, who've been looking at this, and we've identified opportunity areas which we call 100 by 100 opportunities. Opportunities where we think you can generate $100 million in revenue, solving companies' problems, but at the same time, as you solve their problems, maybe the potential to abate 100 megatons of carbon. Again, I know that's a big number, right? But that's the dream. And so what we'd like to be able to do is recruit entrepreneurs, serial entrepreneurs who might not necessarily be climate tech focused, but want to get into it, and we want to save time spending 2 to 3 years of your life researching, hang out, and let's build something together. So that's kind of the action we're taking, because we're not finding a deep enough pool to invest in, so we just look for entrepreneurs to build stuff together with us.
Maybe just to add on to what you're saying, I think you raised a very important point about what appears sort of sexy, and I think you're absolutely right. I think people love the story of the car and innovation around that, and I think that's of course needed. But there's a lot of the old economy stuff that is ignored, and it is maybe far too complex and far too mired in regulation for entrepreneurs to find it interesting enough to jump into. So for example, I think this idea of green hydrogen. There's ample amounts of sunshine around the world, but how do you store the sun? Energy storage is the biggest problem of our time, right? If you could store the energy, very simple, all problems would be solved on climate change. Yeah. But how do you store that energy in a way that is cheap and long-term, right? And large? That's the problem of energy storage. And green hydrogen potentially could provide that. You transfer, what is green hydrogen? You're basically taking renewable energy from the sun or from the wind, and you're converting it through an electrolyzer into hydrogen. But firstly, the conversion is expensive. Secondly, you store it, that's expensive. Thirdly, you transport it, that's expensive. And there needs to be like lots of innovation, lots of scale, lots of transition points there that need to happen to make that technology viable. But it's firstly there's regulation that's not there. Then there's all of these technologies, they're not being adopted at scale, etc. So I guess going back to your point, it's how do you get more entrepreneurs? Because I think the science has happened, but there's perhaps more that needs to scale up there.
Yeah.
That,
no, you're absolutely right, and that's why TLC is here as well, to help define a pool of entrepreneurs and innovations as well. Phil, I'm not sure if you wanted to add anything onto that before I actually go on to Q&A, because we've got quite interesting questions here.
No, but I just say, this brings back to the first comment I made. Green hydrogen is an area of huge investment right now, and it's an area of very high interest for venture. The interesting thing is part of, it's possible. We've been able to make hydrogen from water and electricity for a long time, but again, it's the economics. And part of that will just come from renewable electricity coming down in cost over time, and that will just take time. Part of it needs to come from truly breakthroughs in electrolysis technology, right? So you've got kind of two factors, but ultimately the only thing, well, I shouldn't say that, because for the hydrogen economy to exist, it is a case you need systemic change. But one of the main hurdles is just not can you make green hydrogen, bringing down the cost.
No, that is absolutely right, and we actually end on the right note to go on to the first question of our Q&A. And for those here and as well, the virtual participants, please feel free to put in your questions as well into the Slido. So the first question here is from Kieran from Mars. Keeping existential threat, the 1.5 degrees Celsius in mind, breakthrough technologies should be essentially given away to the world to adopt. From a VC perspective, you want breakthrough technologies to be adopted at a premium price to generate the returns. How do you break this dichotomy? I'll let Paul go first.
Yeah. So, of course, everybody wants everything for free, right? It's just, there's a cost of development. And again, the attitude we're taking, again, especially at the Wavemaker impact level, is this. How do you solve a company's problem in a way that makes them green? Right? So very often we have to fall into the trap of, well, you should pay a little more because it's good for the environment, right? And you will get some support for that. But there will be also the majority of the population that just won't care because it's too much effort, right? And so how do you make it, how do you align it, right? And so again, there will be different ways to solve the problems, and there's probably no one catch-all, right? Of course, we believe that the deep tech route has to go, and that's what we have our friends at Zora for, right? Like, so more power to you, go make that happen, and we'll try to do some of the, more entrepreneurial business model alignment kind of stuff. And so one of the companies that we're building is doing solar-powered irrigation pumps. Starting in Indochina. Why? Because these farmers, they make about $3,000 in profit per year, and they pay about $700 for diesel to pump the irrigation. Now, if you could do solar-powered diesel pumps, you spend a little, $1,000, but then everything is free from that. And then not only do you save for them, you have less carbon emissions, you also increase their productivity. Right? And so all I'm saying is there are ways to do this where you can align people, you can use existing technology and make an impact already. If the world can get excited about, getting a stranger to ferry another stranger in their car and create an Uber, or get a stranger to open up their house so that somebody stays in their house, so it's Airbnb. If we worked hard enough, I'm sure there are probably a lot of ways that we can start thinking about solving problems by just aligning interests, and just by aligning interests and solving problems, you will then get that carbon impact. So that's kind of one approach that we're trying to do.
Thank you, Paul. And from all of you, I guess from the business perspective, what your feedback on
no,
that?
I mean, I think it's a very, how do I say it? It's a very complex question to answer. I mean, the simple answer is like, who would then, if all breakthrough innovations were given away for free, then who would do them? Is the question. I guess the reason we are attracting this smart pool of talent to do and invest their time in breakthrough innovation is because they have a return coming there, right? So they're incentivized to do their best. But if it was being given away for free, in the long run, I think it would lead to an attrition of talent, maybe. So that's the challenge. I agree. I think in an idealistic world, if breakthrough innovations could be given away free, ideally from developed to developing countries or whatever that is, but then how do you make it work in today's system is the challenge, and I think, and that's why there's a payment for it, and that's why there needs to be a very high order of success, or rather high payment.
Right, in the practical world, right? Like if you think about it, like Facebook is free, right? When the product is free, the product is you, right? So what you think is free is not free also, right?
That's true. It's true. Thank you for that. I mean, we can always dream, right? but Phil, coming to you next one for this question. Given greater availability of capital today, there are likely going to be more opportunities to leapfrog more quickly to solve urgent problems. While speed to market is essential, what will you want innovators today to keep in mind as they pitch and execute their solutions?
Could you repeat the last part of the question, sorry?
While speed to market is essential, what will you want innovators today to keep in mind as they pitch and execute their solutions?
What do we want to keep, for entrepreneurs to keep in mind?
I can always go to Paul first if
Yeah.
Paul, you have a response.
Go ahead, thank you.
So if it has to do with deep tech, is the question around deep tech, or is the question any startup?
No, just any technologies, innovations.
Right. I'll go back to what Phil was talking about earlier, right? I think startups right now, there's so much literature in the internet about how to pitch, right? And everybody says, oh, the problem we're trying to solve is this. And there's a difference between a real problem and what I call a pretend problem, right? You can put a pretend problem down just to make your pitch sound better, but really there's no problem. And one of the tips I try to give founders is, what happens if the customer doesn't buy your product? What's the consequence of that? And if there's no real consequence, you're probably not really solving a problem, right? Another way I try to say that might not be so kind is, the world exists fine and will continue to exist fine without your startup, right? You have to go out and fight for your right to exist, to fight for your right to survive. And you do that by creating value. You do that by actually solving a real problem, not a pretend problem. And maybe the second thing that I will put out there is, one of our investment philosophies at Wavemaker is opportunity equals value less perception, right? When the actual value of something is high and the perceived value is still low, there's a big opportunity. When something is so obvious that everybody sees it, it's a tougher opportunity. So I'll relate this to something that Peter Thiel also likes to say, right? What important truth do you believe that few people agree with you on? So the second thing I try to look for is, what's your insight? What do you see that other people don't see? What are you willing to stick your necks out for that might make you look like a fool, but if it actually works, creates a lot of value? That's what Gibb did when he built eFishery, right? He had investors saying, it's never going to work, don't waste your time. So those are probably two things I'd throw at founders. Is it a real problem and pretend problem? And what do you see that other people don't see?
Thank you for that, Paul. And Phil, have you thought of your response yet?
Yeah, well, maybe, I'll say this, is that there is so much more capital available now for deep tech and breakthrough innovations than even just 5 years ago. And yet, for the vast majority of investors, fundraising is still really tough, right? You pitch, you don't get any money. And I would encourage entrepreneurs to really look at some of the best-in-class companies that are on a fast trajectory. And if you look in climate these days, it's not unusual for a company to start with a 10 million round of funding, and within 4 years to have $1 billion plus valuation and be raising hundreds of millions. but you have to really study those companies and understand what they have. And if you get to know them, you know, sometimes maybe you could argue if you got lucky, but often they just start out the gate really understanding their markets. They start out the gate with great teams. And, you know, you can do it even with first-time founders, but then you quickly assemble the resources around you. So I would just say the nice thing now is that, you know, final success of a lot of these companies is still to be proven. But there are a lot of examples of companies which are on really fast trajectories to gather resources that give them at least a shot at, you know, making a dent in our climate problems. And you know, spend the time to study those companies and you'll start to understand the factors which can put you on a similar trajectory.
Thank you for that. I'm going to just ask Malavika one more question before we go up to our final wrap-up question. So on that point, I guess from the solutions or innovations that we've seen out there that you could potentially, you know, contribute to NGO or the companies, what weakness do you see in them? What's one weakness that you see in terms of the solutions that you've seen?
I think it's not so much about weakness. I think there's uncertainty plays a big role in hesitation of companies to make investments or to bet on something in the future. You know, so if you're talking about, I guess, decarbonization, the big question is really, you know, there's a whole spate of technologies which haven't been adopted simply because of combination of inertia or whatever it might be, like which actually lead you to have savings, you know, so energy efficiency technologies, you know, savings, those are obvious, but it requires a little bit of investment and you can do it and you'll get your money back in the next 3-4 years. But it's the stuff that is uncertain. You know, is the price going to come down? Is this going to be widely adopted? Like what happens in 5 years with this technology? Is it going to be adopted? Is the regulation going to change or not? You know, will fossil fuels stop being subsidized, therefore this technology take off, etc. I think that is what prevents sometimes some of these breakthrough innovations which are still not, which are at the pre-commercial stage to be fully adopted. And I don't know if that was your question.
No, that was. Thank you so much for that, Malavika. I mean, thank you everyone for your thoughts and insights on this. I'm just going to wrap up the plenary session with just one question to all of you. The question is, what do you consider to be the most effective action, whether by an individual or an organization, that can enable breakthrough innovations? I'm going to go to Paul first, and then Phil, and then Malavika.
Okay, so we're early stage investors in B2B companies. Close to 90% of our investments are B2B. It's not the most popular thing, mostly B2C, right? And so we get asked this by organizations, right? And so one of the things I tease organizations about is, if you're going to do organization, please be serious about it and don't just do innovation PR, right? Innovation PR is, I'm going to do this hackathon or I'm going to do this thing just so that I look innovative. The reason I encourage that is because unlike established organizations, startups have a limited runway. And the worst thing you can do for a startup is waste their time, right? And so if you're going to really be doing innovation and you want to work with startups, commit to it, right? Have clear goals that you want, have a differentiated buying process, and sort of have a budget for it.
Took my point away.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Now you think of another one, but we're going to Phil first, and then we can go to Malavika after that.
You know, I won't answer from an individual consumer perspective. I'll answer from individuals in the finance world and the corporate world which are interacting with startups. And what I would say, and it's maybe building a little bit on what Paul is saying, is give honest feedback. And I see this all the time, and if you're an entrepreneur, seek honest feedback and hard feedback and tough love, because there is nothing worse. You know, there's a lot of people who want to be entrepreneurs now in climate. There's a huge desire, and there's nothing worse than spending years on an idea which, you know, some really smart, experienced people could have told you the chances of success were very low. But I've always, as an entrepreneur, I always have found that there wasn't enough good direct feedback when you're doing business development with large corporations or when you're talking to investors. As an investor now, I try to give as honest feedback as I can, but it's something, that those tough, honest conversations and interactions with the entrepreneurial community, I think are extremely valuable.
Thank you for that, Phil. And Malavika.
Yeah, I mean, from the point of view of large organizations, I would say, just to add on to what you were saying, like, setting aside time and money concretely at the beginning of the year and saying X amount of time of my executives and X amount of budget has been set aside for innovation. But I think you made that point. I think just to add to that, I think you have to have a culture as well. I think especially when it comes to traditional organizations, there isn't a culture that naturally encourages innovation. So you have to recognize that, and you have to create a separate division or separate something that allows the people who are finding innovation to thrive, and that is not stymied by the old tradition. So I would say time, money, and culture. Maybe those are the three elements that encourage innovation.
And I think that wraps us up really nicely today. In terms of what you guys have just said, commitment, giving honest feedback, interaction with the community, culture. I think this is all what we can look forward to see for the TLC 2022 edition coming up ahead. So I'd like to thank our speakers once again for this time that you've given us, Phil, Paul, and Malavika. We learned a lot from just that, and it's just a perfect start as well to the 2022 edition of TLC. We're excited to be working alongside your organization and the wider community to see sustainability solutions accelerate and scale as well. Thank you once again, and to our audience, thank you for your views and questions. I'd like to say again, thank you to Thomasic Foundation for their vision and dedication to sustainability innovation. To M-Asia, Quest Ventures, Silverstrand and Purpose Venture Capital, our strategic partners, who are putting an additional $100,000 on the table for the finalist team of their choice. Thank you very much as well. Also to all our other partners in the ecosystem for supporting TLC with your passion, your time, and your outreach. As a concluding note, please do share far and wide about the opportunities that TLC 2022 provides for game-changing solutions as we seek to progress our common goal of spurring innovation to advance our net zero ambition. Thank you to all our guests for joining us here today on this Friday afternoon. We'll see you at our grand finale, which will be in June of this year. For our in-person guests, please do stay around for our networking sessions. Please order food and drinks as well. And for our virtual guests, thank you for joining us again, and we hope to see you the next time. Thank you so much. Whew. Thank you.